Okay, so welcome everyone to this webinar on the youth perspective on discrimination, racism, and xenophobia, brought to you by Acampa Madrid and ESN Madrid. Acampa Madrid is an NGO composed of students whose main goal is to raise awareness about refugees, migrants, and human rights. It is also part of a larger group of the International Acampa Network, and it also has presence in Acampa, A Coruña, and Brazil. On the other hand, we have ESN Madrid, which forms part of the Erasmus Student Network. And this is basically the association which welcomes you when you go on exchange to another country or city. And they are the ones that try to make you feel at home by creating activities, being their friends, and guiding you through some university procedures. And today we have two magnificent speakers, Sarahi and Viviane, who will give us some theoretical framework on how, this issue of racism, xenophobia, and discrimination. And later we will have a debate, and I encourage you all to participate because I believe that we all have different perspectives on this. And yeah, I will introduce the speakers, and then I will ask them some questions so that they can continue with their theories and so on. So Sarahi Boleko, she's a graduate student in the Master of International Relations and African Studies, and centers all her investigations and activism in social movements. Anti-racism, migrations, feminisms, and decoloniality. Then we have Viviane Ogou, who is a young Afro-Catalan student pursuing a master's in international security. And she is a delegate for Spain in the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe, and also is the founder of Puerta de Africa Association and an activist for fundamental human rights. Then after their presentation, as I said before, we will have a debate, and I really hope that you all engage in it. And Viviane, Sarahi, thank you so much for joining us today. And I would like to ask you my first question, that is for Sarahi. To understand racism, it is important to define properly the concept of race. How can be race conceptualized?
Okay, so hello, thank you for introducing us. So the idea of race is important to understand it as a social construct, because it has been established since colonial times and slavery period. It's too important to understand that the idea of race points white people in the peak of the pyramid, and everything that goes around them also is point in the peak of the pyramid, such as the culture, such as the institutional organization, their facial features, and the tone of their skin. So everything that it is not surrounded by white people, it is conceptualized as the otherness, such as the gypsies, the indigenous people, the Asians, and the black people. Everything that surrounds these people of color were situated below this pyramid, and white people were considered superior just because of all of these characteristics that point them in the first category of the human civilization. This is important to understand because without this idea of race, racism cannot stay alive until these days. As this idea is a social construction that we have been socialized and we have normalized until nowadays, racism can still be in a system of oppression that we can understand as the white the more white you look, the more Occidental you look and you act, the less racism you will suffer. And that is also understood as colorism, which is also a category of racism. So it's important to understand this idea of race, because without it, racism and all the systematic discrimination that people of color has been suffering, Black people have been suffering, indigenous people have been suffering, cannot exist. So I think that I try to explain myself a little. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. My second question is for Viviane. Can you tell us when and how racism appears?
Thank you, Acampa Madrid, for the organization of this webinar. I think it's very important that we are debating these things more than ever, right? So thank you for your question. Yeah, I think it's important to conceptualize racism within the framework of history, because this helps us to understand how it's been constructed, how it's been built. Because like racism is something that has not always been present in human relations. We have to understand that racism is a system of relations, more or less. And sometimes we believe that when we talk about racism, we are focusing more in questions such as discursive questions. Like we understand racism more related to the discourse of, for example, far right wing parties, or that persons that concretely have an ideology that goes against people of other nationalities and ethnic groups. But that's not like this. Like the racist discourse is a construction that has been, as I said, constructed, but to say it somehow a posteriori, after the appearance of racism as a system itself. We can place the beginning of the system at the beginning of the colonization, of the American colonization. Nowadays, we have been learning that there weren't civilizations, that the civilizations in that period were not very advanced, but actually there were when the European first arrived to the America, there were diplomatic exchanges. So there were a system, a social system that was actually pretty advanced. And when the colonization happened, it was necessary to legitimize what was happening there, why they were treating people not as equals. For example, if we read the letters from that time, we see that, for example, that from the very beginning, the persons were explained to the kings and queens here in Europe as they were not humans, and that's why they could work as non-humans. They could be used for working in precarious situations because they were not conceptualized as human. Then there was a work, especially from the Christian sectors, that tried to remind and to reclaim the humanity of those people. And well, this was a construction. Then we saw the slavery, the international slavery, and again, we needed to have the discourse to legitimize, especially in front of God, because at that moment God was really important. So the Christian movements were really into questioning what were happening in the economic, more in economic terms, and how we were treating the economic relations. So the legitimation were that, well, okay, they are humans. And at that moment, they accepted they were humans, but they were less advanced, less civilized persons. So that's why they could be working in different ways. They wouldn't have the same rights that any other person had. The same happened with Africa after the international slavery trade. We find the colonization of Africa, that again, we've been learning that Africa hasn't any kind of social systems before Europeans arrived, but actually There were a lot of diplomatic relations. There were states that were really advanced economic and social systems. So again, when the colonization in Africa happens and the people is used for work and the properties are taken, we needed a discourse to legitimize that what we're doing. So here is where we say that actually racism is a discourse or is a relationship that appears due to support the economic system. So racism appears only to support the economic system somehow at that time because it was needed to legitimize what were happening, and that was a manner of doing so. As I said, well, I think now we have been very summarized, because this is a matter that could occupy us hours to talk and debate and understand, right? But we have explained how racism is constructed. Now we can see how we got to the point that we are seeing racism and confronting racism, and that comes from the anti-racist movements. I like to say that the anti-racist movements began right after the colonization of the Americas, when I told you that the Christians were asking for the persons living in the Via Yala, to the indigenous persons, to be understood as humans. So for me, that's the beginning somehow to understand to the anti-racist movement, a very primitive one, but I think that's the first step. Then we see the second wave of the anti-racist movement with the abolition of the international slavery trade, first in Britain and France. Europe, we were the first abolishing the system. And then in the United States, that, as you know, the northern states didn't want wanted to abolish the system of slavery, while the southern states didn't want to. That's one of the main reasons of the American Civil War. And again, here we can see how, and I'm gonna end soon, how this is actually built up on the economic system, because the only reason that the northern people were actually willing to give more rights, actually to give the category of citizens and not the category of only human capital for production to Black people or Hispanic people that were coming from Southern America, was because they had different economic systems. But well, that's another thing. Then after the abolition of slavery, we find that there was segregation. Black people were citizens, but citizens with no full rights, right? They only had some rights. There were segregation, there were exclusion. The same here in Europe. Something was happening here. We had lots of slaves too. So we passed through the same more or less situation that the American one, but I think that one is really easy to explain. Then we have the segregation system, the Jim Crow laws, right? And here is where we see the movements again, the movement for civil rights. And yeah, so well, with this brief introduction to the history of racism, I can say now that today there is still racism, because this is a social construction, is a relation of system of relations that has been built across history. And where people is categorized and dependence of their race. It's not that you see someone and you say, okay, you are bad, you're good, but actually our mind has been constructed like this, kind of work like this. You see a person who is white and you say, okay, this person might be a good person, might have studies. While when you see someone who is Black or who is Hispanic or who is from Asia, you might not think the same. So even the Jure, we do have the same rights. We all do have the same rights, at least in Europe and in America. De facto, your race determines the possibilities you have in life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My third question would be for Sarahi, and which are the differences between racism, xenophobia, and discrimination?
Okay, thank you. So as Viviane has well explained the social construction of racism. The main difference between racism and xenophobia and discrimination is that racism is a systematic oppression that is still being alive because of because it has been constructed by history. Racism affects to people of color lives because what they are, because of their facial features, because of the tone of their skin. Not people of color will suffer racism because since the beginning of their life, in an institutional way, in a cultural way, in a political way, in a cultural way. I say that already, but it's important to understand this. Racism is a structural discrimination and systematic. Racism won't be happen just once in time in your life. It will happen during your life because because we are a person of color. Because I am a Black woman, I suffer racism. I don't suffer racism once, but in a systematic way. Okay, but this differs from xenophobia. White French men can suffer xenophobia here in Spain because he's a foreign here in Spain. But he won't be suffering racism because he's white, and being white establishes him in a peak of the human pyramid, and he will not suffering racial discrimination because he's white. He will suffer xenophobia because he's foreign. He's from another country. And finally, discrimination. The concept of discrimination. We have to understand that every human being can suffer discrimination, but not in a systematic way. Not in a systematic way that racism manifests in the life of the of the people of color. Okay, this is important because a white woman can go to Uganda for volunteering and can be suffer a kind of discrimination because what she is, okay? But he won't be suffering racism in Uganda because she is white. He may be suffering discrimination, he may be suffering xenophobia, but he won't be suffering racism. This is important to understand because sometimes we confuse these terms and we think that racism can be experienced by everybody. But no, this is a system that only affects people of color because the social construct that racism has been. Okay, so that is.
Okay, so as far as I understood, racism is not only to insult someone, nor the aggressions and murders that we have seen in the U.S. So how can race be seen in the daily life in Europe?
Can I go first, Sarahi? Thank you. So yeah, I think it's very interesting what Sarahi has been pointing out, and especially the fact that it's something systematic, right? I will give a couple of examples that we can see in our day-to-day life, or we can suffer, or we can see our friends or family or people which we are relative to suffer. One, I will explain you like an anecdote. The other day I was talking to a guy. He was working now with the World Bank or something like this with an NGO. and well, he explained me. He's from Colombia. He explained me that when he was young, well, he was from a kind of wealthy family, so he could go to a very prestigious university in Colombia. So he had good grades, he had a good CV, but whenever he tried to enter to the market, to the labor market in another country, he found himself with a wall. He was one of the best students of his university. He was really spectacular, like a really good guy, right? And when he asked for counseling to see why he wasn't accepted in any enterprise, he wasn't receiving answers to the inquiries for work, etc. And when he asked for counseling, the person told him, "Wait, you have to understand that you come from a Colombian university. You see, they are not even considering your CV because you come from Colombia." So that's one day-to-day thing that we can see, for example, in racism, that if you are from one of those countries which are considered less, you are seen and you are perceived as less. So you won't be given the same opportunities because people won't think, okay, well, he comes from that kind of university, or well, he comes from this country. He might not be that good as could be a white person or a person from here. Another example, now here I'm gonna citate the Harvard Business Review, something I like a little bit. They talk about the possibility that a person of color can have to go up to the ladder of responsibilities within an enterprise or in a government or wherever, right? And that's because you have to adapt, right? If you are seen as a foreigner, if you have like another skin color, or if you come from a country that is not considered good, because, for example, we can see, this is a really interesting difference, how Japanese generally doesn't suffer the same racism that might suffer a Chinese, for example, and that's because of the international relations that has Japan and the US that positions Japan in a good position in the international system, blah blah blah. That's very long. So you won't have the same opportunities to have the same jobs. You won't have the same opportunities to have a position of responsibility. I think that's these two examples can conceptualize it properly. I don't know if Sarahi wants to add something.
Thank you, Viviane. There are good instances. Also, as an example, could be this summer I was looking for rent a house. So my mother tongue is Spanish, and while I was looking, I called to rent a house. So I don't speak, I don't have any foreign accent. I have a Spanish accent, a Madrid accent. And so everything went good until they saw me. When they saw me, after visiting the house, they told me that the house has been booked already. So that's a kind of racism, because they won't say to you directly that I won't rent it to you because you are Black, but in the deep of you, you know that that's the reason that they are not renting the house for you. So that is a kind of experience. The other one goes with the hair, because as a Black woman, African Black woman, they always have told us that our hair, our Afro hair is messy. It looks unprofessional. You need to to straighten your hair to look more professional, to look more respectable. So that went deep in us as a Black woman, and goes when we as a Black woman go out and present ourselves in work with this hair, with this Afro hair, is a kind of empowerment, because they white people will always thought that this hair look messy, look unprofessional, look like that, because of the stereotypes that people has been telling us about our facial features, our physical features of Black persons, our Black people. So that are my two examples. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to you said it's not like what you comment adults or others are just the right? And I don't know, I'm hearing myself doubly. Well, never mind. So, oh, thank you, sorry. So, yeah, so that's only the peak. Like racism itself, it's something that you don't see. It's something that it's not easy to say, this is racism, because sometimes it's something that it's just without being seen properly. I know a lot of cases, as Sarahi has stated, that persons that didn't want to be rented a house, and then another person, a white person, called the same house and was like, yes, you can come, of course. No one has rented it yet. So yeah, just to sum up, thank you.
Thank you so much, girls, for all these personal experiences. I actually can relate to some of them, but yeah, that's we can leave that for the debate if it happens to be talked about. And now, after the presentation, as I have said before, my colleague Martin Machio, who is a tourism and business administration student, will introduce some questions so that we can all start talking about the topic and discuss different ideas.
Hi guys, thank you Ifi and Sarahi and Viviane. So yeah, we're going to start with the question part, okay? Now I will ask 5 questions to our participants, and they will answer as they like, okay? If anyone wants to be first, please tell now. So now the questions are going to be, have you ever experienced a situation like this, like the ones Viviane and Sarahi have talked about? The second question, what do you think is the main problem with racism, xenophobia? How would you change things? Which is the most effective way to eradicate racism? And if does education plays a key role in eradicating racism? And what are your future expectations? Sorry, about racism eradication. So, who wants to be the first one answering these questions?
I could go first.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation for the invitation to this webinar. I thank Acampa Madrid as well as ESN from University of Rey Juan Carlos for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Concerning the first question, so have I ever suffered because of racism? I would say regarding my life in Europe, and mainly focusing on my life on Germany and Spain, the 2 countries where I spent most of my time here in Europe, I can tell that I have never really experienced any type of discrimination against myself due to racism. At least there was no apparent nor explicit racism, I think. Of course, there were instances in my life when I did experience discrimination against myself, but due to other reasons, I think, for being a little bit different there, here and there, but I think certainly not because those were caused by racism. But having said that, I probably, not 100% sure, did experience light forms of racism when I was conducting a semester abroad in Japan. For example, people just looking at me in a strange way, or changing seats in the trains after me having chosen a seat, or even not desiring to speak to me. These were like, not, I don't know, maybe light forms of xenophobia or racism that I've experienced, but that was in Japan, being, of course, not a Japanese person. Should I go on with the next questions, or? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can go.
Okay, then what is the main topic about racism? What is the problem of racism? I think, generally speaking, racism can lead to, first of all, to a lack of mutually benefiting cooperation. This is the baseline, where you perceive as someone not being the right person to cooperate with just because of his skin color. This is like the mild form of racism. But of course, there are also more severe forms of persecution, as we have seen throughout history and sadly continue to see nowadays. But I would like to elaborate my own belief a little bit that potentially racism is a part of human nature itself, which means that I think, from my perspective, that the problem lies within the character of humans themselves a little bit. Generally speaking, I believe that there are many studies nowadays that focus on socially acquired racism. That means that racism within people could be caused, or perhaps is caused, as a result of their upbringing, wrong education, or societal structures, right, that perpetuate this type of behavior. While I don't necessarily want to disagree with this notion, I really do hold the belief that people can be substantially influenced by education and socialization. I also tend to uphold the importance of innate psychological factors that may have been the product of our evolution as humans. So in no way, shape, or form I can be considered a psychologist. And having established this fact, still I would like to offer some possible key factors rooted in basic human psychology that can lead to racism. And maybe some of you consider my viewpoint a little bit pessimistic, my viewpoint about humans. But as we probably all know, the human way of taking decisions is not completely rational, right? Our way of reasoning can be divided, I think, into two main parts: in the more rational thinking part, as well as in the more emotional and thought pattern driven part. And one of these patterns, which probably has to do with racism, is the so-called in-group, out-group bias. There have been conducted multiple studies on this issue during the last decades. Experiments, for example, by the scientist, I think his name is Henry Tajfel. I think that's the right way to pronounce him. It was found by him and his colleagues that even slight arbitrary differences that can be used to distinguish groups, for example, people of one group clothing themselves in a certain way and the other people clothing themselves differently. Only those arbitrary differences are enough to be the ground for prejudice and resource allocations in favor of the own group over the other group. So prejudice towards people that are different from ourselves, not just based on race, seem to be part of our human nature, which in return means that our nature is part of the problem as well. To sum up a little bit, I would say for some people, foreigners are just not included within their perceived in-group. There are some people who can be considered racist people who don't perceive that the foreigners of different skin color, different nationality, don't belong to their own group. They don't feel that emotion. They don't follow that thought pattern. And probably based on this imperfection of human thinking, it is possible that racist ideologies may thrive and racism becomes systematic, which would be a typical interaction between nature and nurture. I think without the biological factors, it wouldn't be possible for any kind of systematic racism to exist. I think it is also rooted in the biological part of our human nature. So you've asked the question, how would I change the things? If you consider my reasoning to be correct, as I've said, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a business administration student. But if you consider my reasoning to be correct, in that case, I think the answer would be as follows. We should be trying to minimize the effects of the so-called in-group, out-group bias. If we translate this into concrete social policies, I would suggest that we should strive to create a more unified and homogeneous society. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't accept foreigners or people of other skin colors to our countries. No. Obviously, a certain degree of multiculturalism is an enrichment to society. We want to perceive other cultures. We want to know more about other cultures. But it means that foreigners that are coming to our countries, and I am also a foreigner, I'm from Germany, but I have non-German roots. But I think that foreigners should be integrated properly into the receiving country's culture. And also that a common culture is established that is followed by all people regardless of the skin color. Why am I proposing this? Because if the foreigners share more in common with the people of the host country, I think racist tendencies may decrease towards them as they're more considered part of the so-called in-group. Slowly, people with backwards racist ideas will subconsciously realize that foreigners can also become part of their own group. Just to summarize, I think the integration is the key. The proper integration of foreigners into society is the key to solve the problem of racism. Can we eradicate this subconscious thought pattern completely? That I can't answer. If it really is an evolutionary product, it may be, I don't know. It could demand a very long process to change this thought pattern, to eradicate racism for our subconscious thinking. So, and also you asked what would be the most effective thing to eradicate racism, and I think education is obviously a factor here. I think integration policies and thus education as a part of integration policies are the potential key of success in order to eradicate racism. For me, this translates into teaching the foreigners the language, the history, the culture, the customs of their host nation. Especially the education of the foreigners' children becomes crucial, as not every parent has the resources and is able to do this for their children. I think the state has to play an important role in this regard. That means, for example, that in schools in Spain, we're in Spain, right? Let's talk about Spain. For example, in schools in Spain, there could be special courses offered for children of foreigners with emphasis on Spanish language, Spanish culture and customs, as well as Spanish history. But equally important is to combat segregation between people of different skin colors, right? To combat segregation in schools, there must be some common extracurricular activities for all children. Spending more time, from my point of view, is the basis. Spending more time together is the basis for the creation of a collective, for a true collective. And overall, as I've said, I think schools could play a major part in this type of education of people of all colors to create a more homogeneous, in the sense of more collective society. Racism will be eradicated in the end. Subconsciously, I don't know if it is possible. as people with more racist tendencies see other people of different countries being able to acquire the host country's culture, and those will be seen then as a part of the in-group. What are my expectations about the future? I would...
Sorry, Ruslan.
Yeah.
We have some questions in the chat and some comments. Okay. I'm going to read them, and then you can guys tell your opinions about it. And I think that there were some people that wanted to talk now. So the first comment made was by Zeltia Mato, and it was basically if you were saying that racism is natural in the human being as being something inherent. I mean, is that what you're trying to say?
Can you repeat the question?
Is he saying that racism is natural in the human being as inherent?
Thank you for the question. I think without a biological basis, there couldn't be social racism. So there has to be some kind of inherent bias, subconscious bias in human perception that makes racism possible. Why am I saying that? Because imagine if we have a world without racism. I think cooperation is mutually beneficial, right? Why should I discriminate against someone just because he has another skin color? I could be creating with him. I could build a house with him. I could produce with him goods. I think that's why. So for me, racism is not a logical thing. It has to do with the subconsciousness. That's why I think there has to be a biological root. What I've said is there is a bias in human perception that probably has a link to racism, but also to other types of superficial discrimination. So it can be racism, but it also can be, oh, this person dresses in another way than I do, so I discriminate against him. Or this person likes different music, and then I create prejudice. And I think racism builds on top of this bias in human perception. That would be the answer.
Okay, so we had another comment from Marina, who basically said that the debate about race should not be eliminated from public discourse. It gives a chance to those who still look up when the so-called less important ethnicities walk by to not choose ignorance. Superior races do not exist, so I disagree with the statement that it is a psychological issue. I believe it is simply ignorance and fear of what is different, which sadly prevents from cooperation. Yeah, that's it. I think that if anyone wants to say something about it, he can do that. But I think that also Viviane wanted to say something, so you can go ahead with it.
Okay. I think you made really interesting points. Russ, it's your name, Russ or Ian? Excuse me.
It's Ruslan. Ruslan.
Ruslan. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. I think
nice to meet you as well. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you. I think you made really interesting points, and that you try to give a psychological reasoning to the fact that there is racism, but from my point of view, from the point of view of the international organizations, and from the point of view of the people that can actually say and actually say to suffer racism, we have to understand that racism is not a behavior itself, but is a social construction. You cannot have direct. You cannot give direct threats to racialized persons of colors and be racist. Me myself, I'm sometimes racist. And regarding what you were saying about the integration of foreigners, I'm not a foreigner. For example, and I do suffer racism. My mother, she's white. I've been raised in a white family, Catalan family. Actually, we talk Catalan at home. And my father who is from abroad. I'm mixed race, but I still suffered from racism. I don't need integration because I never need integration, but I still suffered from racism. So it's not a matter of integrating people from abroad, because it's not a matter of migration. Migration and racism go separately, and of course for xenophobia, we can say that of course integration of migrant people is important, but they are generally integrated. So we cannot blame people who actually do the effort for integrating in the welcoming society, because anyone who travels to another society generally tries to integrate because is trying to have a better life and live in the frameworks of the place they arrive to. But actually, it's not a matter. We cannot blame the people who come from abroad for ideas that we have been socializing for a long time. So from my point of view, and I'm gonna end, of course, because I would like to hear everyone else. Racism, it's not connected directly to migration, because as I said before, racism began with colonization, and that's actually a form of migration, but very different from the one we're suffering we're living today, right? It doesn't begin because persons moved to Europe, but actually because of the contrary, because persons from Europe moved to another regions. And well, I think it's important to clarify that, because I felt that you were actually saying that racism doesn't exist, and I think that's very harmful, not only for this discussion, but also because there is people who is directly dying because of this. In the United States, you can say that the person who are dying and who are being shot by policemen have to integrate because they are Americans. And well, I can give a lot more of examples, such as here in Europe, that, for example, we have a lot of people working in the agricultural sector who is actually permitting us to eat fruits and vegetables during every day in our life. But there is people who don't want to rent them houses, so they have to live in shanks. But they are integrated, and I actually talked to the people in the neighborhoods, and I asked, but are they bad? Are they I don't know, committing smuggling or something? And they are no, they are so nice. It's just like that we don't want to rent them houses. So yeah, I think it's harmful to deny racism, and I think it was necessary that I clarified that.
Should I answer?
Thank you so much, Viviane. I would say that the rest of the participants could say their opinions as well, so we can all express our beliefs. Is anyone who wants to go ahead with it?
Yes.
Maybe I don't want to be like. Okay, great. Thank you, Emna.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Sorry for not activating my camera, but I am actually in the car. I'm not driving, but I am on my way to home. I think I was supposed to answer the question, and I wanted also to answer to Ruslan's opinion. First of all, thank you for this exposition, and I think there is something that Viviane said very well, that is racism is a social construction. Racism is an education, is a kind of education, and we are educated like that. It's something normal that people normalize it because we was educated like that. It's something that is interiorized in our mentality, in our formal and informal education, and I think that's the problem. It's not really related with immigration or with people from other countries who travel to Europe to look for a better life, but it's something that was interiorized in our mentality, in our education. education and and the mostly European, or if you want to say the North policies. And if I can answer some of the question that Martin said, because I am talking today like as an ex-international student in Madrid, where I enjoyed my Erasmus Plus mobility. I'm from Tunisia, so from a country which is seen like different for European, a Muslim country, an Arab country from North Africa. So I didn't suffer directly racism, but it was indirectly. And when I by indirectly, I refer to question like why you don't wear hijab, why in your country you do the Ramadan, why do you drink alcohol, do you eat pork, do you date guys. I think that kind of question are indirect racism, and this question comes from these interest stereotypes, cliches that we have, and that the most of the society have about other societies. And I think this is the real problem, because we don't look for information about other people, about other societies, black societies, Arab societies, Asian societies. No, we just listen to some cliches, to some stereotypes, and and from that we have this social construction. And I think this is the main problem. And if you want to change the things, we have to educate ourselves. There is a formal and informal educate. We have to read about other societies. We have to open our minds to share with other people opinions, to see how they live, how they came like that, what's their tradition, what their history, what their religion, because we have to educate ourselves, and we have to see more than what we see in the media, what we listen from authorities, and that's how we can eradicate racism. And in the future, I think one of the things that ESN today fight for is the acceptance of the acceptance of a great panorama, a great umbrella of different origins, of different countries, and people from all over the world to live with each other, to enjoy with each other and mobility. And this is our value in ESN, because I am an ESNer also, because I enjoyed my mobility, and thanks to ESN I didn't really suffer xenophobia. I didn't really suffer racism, and I really believe that is our duty, this generation, to change the things and change the mentality and the whole thing. So I am talking today like an international student who enjoyed her mobility in Europe, and like an ESNer, and what ESNer fight for, and what is the main objective of ESN, to really convivate and collaborate with all over people from all over the world, no matter your identity, no matter your origin, no matter the aspect or your physique or your religion, because this is what we are fighting for. We are the future. We are this, and with this generation, we are going to change so much things. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Emna. I'm really happy to hear that thanks to ESN you had a much better experience during your exchange. I have some more comments in the live chat. Marina now says that if not education, do you think that promoting racial diversity in the company's labor force is a good tool to eradicate racism and xenophobia? And she clarifies, I mean, through legal regulation in the company's employment. Is anyone who wants to answer that question? Well, okay, then you guys don't want to answer. Okay, so if not education, do you think that promoting racial diversity in the company's labor force is a good tool to eradicate racism and xenophobia?
Yeah, it's a good tool in order to include people of color in labor, because they are being discriminated because of their skin color, because of these stereotypes, and it is also a way to include these people into the labor, and it is a good manner that can be added also to educating, like Black empowerment, the people of color empowerment by professional links. And if you have an idea, and a business idea, and you need help, you can also invest in this. You can also try to avoid this social exclusion, labor exclusion that people of color has been suffering, structural suffering because of racism. But we also do need education. We need both of these things in order to eradicate racism. We need something else that is change everything. But as an individuals, we can do little acts that can also help to eradicate this systematic discrimination.
I want to add something to this. So basically, I think, so I've never been discriminated, but as a white person, I think one of my responsibilities is to be aware of the privileges I got and to be responsible in my actions, as it can be if I'm going to hire someone, and to be responsible of what I do. So I think if everyone is educated to be aware in their privileges and realize that everything they do is going to make a change, because it does, it's a way to make a little change and go forward. And also, I think part of the discrimination comes from the ignoration. Like we are not, we don't know. We are afraid of something that is different to us, so we tend to go to generalizations or social constructs. But if we expose ourselves to these things, so for example, people that have been in exchanges, that have probably been exposed to diverse people, cultures, and of course skin color, and it's the only way to deconstruct the ideas we've got. Me as a teacher, I teach at a primary school, and once we did an activity which was like find our skin color, and of course no one had the same skin color. And I think exposing ourselves that doesn't define your identity, that's another thing. It's a way to expose ourselves and realize that this is reality, and this is what we've got, and there's nothing different between people because of their skin color. Well, that's my idea.
I would like to add some nuances. There's actually some research also done on this topic by Muzaffar Sherif. And the research has shown that including or uniting people from different groups, in-groups, out-groups, to work on common goals, working towards the same goals, can actually help to decrease the prejudice. And what I wanted to say is that not necessarily contact with other people. Actually, contact and talking to other people can lead to increased levels of racism because stereotypes are reinforced. But working on common goals towards other groups on the same tasks can actually help to reduce racism. This is one very important nuance, also backed by the science. And another thing is, I would like to add to what Beatriz said. Yes, you have to fight racism, but not necessarily in a way that white people are subject to discrimination, if you know what I mean. So you have to educate, you have to integrate, you have to, of course, attack the ideas of racism, but I wouldn't suggest that there should be like some percentages. So we need to have that many Black people or Asian people or, I don't know, Italian, German people in this company. You have to find other possible ways to decrease the levels of racism while not discriminating against white people. So you shouldn't fight injustice with more injustice. Just because there were 500 years ago people engaging in slavery, having blacks as slaves.
Ruslan, I think that Sarahi wants to talk right now, so
okay,
maybe
please.
She can talk now. Thank you.
Yep.
So what Beatriz has been saying, and also Emna, and also I, we have been saying that in order to include people of color in labor, in professional business, we are not talking about quotas or a kind of percentage. We are talking about eradicate the stereotypes that are blocking you from hiring a Black person, an Asian person, an indigenous person into your business. That's what we are trying to say. You have to eradicate all these stereotypes that are blocking you in order to hire people of color. We are not talking about establishing some necessary quotas, but it's important to understand that the people of color are excluded from professional work, and because of that, they are being discriminated. And by including these people of color into professional work, we are not discriminating white people. We are just giving people of color the same kind of rights that white people has. So that's all.
I perfectly agree with you. Just one sentence. I just wanted to focus on the point that when trying to promote people of different races, you have to be cautious not to do it in a way that, for example, the privileged white people are discriminated against. I just wanted to say that you have to be cautious to not fight injustice with more injustice. That's it.
First of all, reverse racism doesn't exist. Reverse racism is not an actual thing. What you're talking about is just saying that because they make companies like you have to have certain percentage of women, for example, in positions of power, doesn't mean that they are discriminating against men. Sexism is mostly towards women. Also, another thing I disagree a lot about what you said, which was something that you contradicted yourself with, was saying that immigrant people should be put into some special kind of course to be taught culture about Spain. I'm an immigrant child. I came when I was 2 years old. I don't need that. I've been shoved Spanish culture, Spanish language to me since I stepped for the first time foot in Spain. I don't need that. What needs to be done is to teach the people from the local place how diversity is important, how other cultures are important, how multiculturality makes our own surroundings more, how can I say it, more
more complete. Multiculturality is just part of how we should be living. Just doesn't mean that if I come to Spain, I need to learn Spanish. I'm going to learn Spanish because I'm going to live here. Other people need to learn that because I have a strange name and surname, they don't have to write to laugh at me. That's xenophobia. That's not racism, obviously, because I'm white. But the thing is that just because I have a strange surname doesn't mean that everyone has the right to laugh at me, and that has happened to me my whole life. That's one part of it. Also, I'm from Armenia. Armenia, mostly the society in Armenia is very homogeneous. Most people are white, and lately these last few years a lot of Pakistani people have been moving there, and there's been a lot of racism towards them. But recently there was a war in Armenia 1 month ago, and that collective, that Pakistani collective, was one of the ones that was helping the most to try to raise money, to raise food to be sent to the conflictive areas. I was on Erasmus in Greece, and I went to Athens, and when I talked to Greek people about the area I was living at, they were like, oh, that's such a dangerous place. You are living surrounded by immigrants. What? The thing is that I was not living surrounded by immigrants, the fact that there were immigrants that were not white, because later I moved to a non-immigrant area, and they would not say anything to me, but it was still all immigrants, just that they were white and European. It's all based in Eurocentrism. It's even here in Spain, we can suffer some kind of xenophobia just because we are from Eastern Europe. And for example, there's this cliche about Romanian people. They are dirty, they steal, they are blah, blah, blah. That's xenophobia. It's something that exists. It goes through education, and it has been going on for centuries. Even though you say that it's psychological, it's not psychological. It's all in education. Me, I'm from Armenia, as I have said. Armenian people are usually tend to be more racist and xenophobic than in other countries, because they don't have that multicultural fact that I'm talking about that is so important in education. And the fact is that each individual has the right to choose to educate themselves in social matters like homophobia, sexism, racism. You are the one that decides to introduce yourself to that and learn from other people who are suffering it, and they can teach you how you can improve in this kind of things. I'm a white person after all. I'm a white woman after all, and my right is to know my privilege and try to help raise the voices of those who actually know what's the problem. That's all.
Thank you very much. I think you brought some very interesting points. I just wanted to add a little bit. I think there is reverse racism. As I've said, I've been in Japan. Maybe I have a different point. White people in Japan, because I've spent some time in Japan, have a very difficult time to find a job and a place to live in. I know maybe in your concept this is not reverse racism. I just wanted to bring up an example where I think
it's not racism.
Okay. And the other thing is, I wanted to comment. You said it's about education and about the upbringing of people that causes racism. Certainly, you will have a point there. There can be. I didn't deny that there can be systematically fostered racism. But then I wanted to ask you another question. You say it has nothing to do with the biology, but then how do your parents are from the old Soviet Union, right?
Yes.
Mine also. So I want to ask you the question. I think you can add on that very interestingly. In the Soviet Union, there was, I think, a major fight against racism, right? People were educated to respect all nations, that all nations in the Soviet Union, regardless of their skin color, were equal. This was the idea promoted.
Nowadays too. I've been in school here in Spain. I've been educated in Spanish schools, and they teach us that we are all equal. We're this, we're that. And then you see other people still treating you badly just because I had a friend who was from Morocco. She was treated badly because she was from there. I was laughed at because of my name and surname, because they are strange and nobody knows how to pronunciate it. That's still racism and xenophobia. Okay. Even though they teach us on the fact that we are all equal, there's still that fact, because we are not only based on the education we receive at schools, but also the education we receive at home and on our surroundings.
And there I wanted to say that the Soviet Union had a pretty strong, some say totalitarian education. There was feminism and anti-racism were the doctrine of the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Feminism and as a socialist country, it was a left country, it was a doctrine. And in the end, the Soviet Union collapsed also due to racism and xenophobia, or maybe not racism, but nationalism against the other countries. So you know the problem of Azerbaijan and Armenia, of course. Mm-hmm. It's a big disaster, humanitarian disaster.
It's still active.
And also the other countries, Russia, Ukraine. Mm-hmm. There was so many spikes of nationalism and xenophobia, although in the Soviet Union, anti-racism and equality of all nations was preached. So on the social side, I think the Soviet Union did a big job trying to convince everyone that you should respect all nations.
They did nothing, because Eastern European countries, the ones that were in the Soviet Union, are the ones that have the biggest problem in sexism, homophobia, and racism. They are still a very homogeneous society, because it's all white people that live there. There is still racism and xenophobia in those countries.
Actually, in the Kazakhstan and those countries, there are many Asian people.
I mean, Armenia, depending on the editorial we're talking about, is said that is Asian. That doesn't matter. What I'm saying is racism, white people, black people, people of color, and people from other countries. Even though I'm Armenian and all the Soviet Union countries were taught the same things, there's still xenophobia against, for example, Ukrainian people, against Romanian people. It still exists because it was not put in the best way possible into education. Because yes, they teach you that on school, but if you don't take that approach and put it in your life as well, it doesn't matter, because we all know that we are all equal, but inequality still exists.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say there are cases, the Soviet Union then, Spain nowadays, maybe other European countries nowadays, that try to have, from the social point of view, an influence to change racist behavior in a way that it doesn't exist anymore. And all those attempts, they seem to have failed, right? In your opinion?
Yes.
Why is that then, that this social experiments to try to fight racism fail so often?
I think I can answer to that a little bit.
Please. I would like to know the answer.
First of all, who is planifying against racism? People who suffers from racism, or people who doesn't really understand what racism is? I think that's an interesting question, because when you try to fight against racism, but you don't include the people who suffer from racism in this fight, you're not really fighting against that. Sometimes something that's really interesting and that makes me think a lot is that we've all been taught at school that we are equal. And I think that's one of the things that prevent us a lot of times to accept the inner racism we do have. I always will say that I am racist. I was talking about this with Sarahi before, because I've been socialized in this way. The thing is that we haven't been changing the basis and the foundations of racism. What we have been changing is the discourse. But how can you change racism if Black people or Japanese people or Armenian people? Because I think for me, racism also includes like ethnicity, not only race as a skin color, but ethnicity, right? But if they don't have the same economic opportunities, and you don't promote their economic opportunities, even though you're talking about racism, you cannot end it, because in part racism is stopping them from escalating in the social level, right? And yeah, I would like to hear other persons, so I won't build up more on that. But I think that's a good, like an interesting reflection about it. And of course, psychology has a lot to do, because everything comes from psychology, from our inner selves. But it's more complicated and more constructed than that, from my point of view.
Yeah, thank you. I think Sarahi, you and me were talking too much. Maybe we should let the other people talk.
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest that we could change the topic, because I was thinking while hearing you, if cultural appropriation could be considered racist. Do you have an opinion on that? What do you think?
Can someone define for me the term of cultural appropriation?
Is anyone willing to answer to Ruslan, or?
Can you repeat the question, please? Because I just missed it.
Okay, so the question is, could cultural appropriation be racist?
I think that it's a very technical question, and an expert of racism should answer, and not one of us. I don't know. It's just my opinion. Because when we talk about cultural appropriation, we are talking in a point very technical, and we need more than 2 hours in a webinar to talk about it.
I mean, I understand that it's a specific thing to talk about, but I still wanted to ask you your opinions to see if, I mean, we are all students here in the end, so I don't think that there's a wrong or right answer. So that's why I was thinking that that would be an interesting thing to discuss. But also, I don't think that we have much more time. I mean, like, we have more or less 10 minutes. So if anyone wants to say something else, I think that that's the moment.
Can I say something? Like a final point?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that we have to stop justifying racism. We have to stop justifying normal thing that is not normal. We cannot just normalize a racist conduct, racist attitude. And this is the main problem. And we cannot just say white people are suffering racism. Sorry, but no. White people are suffering other things, and we have to say that the minorities, the people, and the societies that doesn't share the same color, the same religion, the same history, the same identity are marginalized and are suffering a lot of racism. And I think that it's our duty, like young people, to educate ourselves, to educate the future generation about this, to open our minds for living with each other, because no one can say what is right and what is wrong, and just respecting our difference. And thank you very much for organizing this webinar, because it's a great place to talk about things like this. And I think it's very important to sensibilize about this, about racism and xenophobia. That's it. Ify.
Well, thank you so much, Emna. If you guys want to say something else, I encourage you to do so. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm like so repetitive, but I really want that different opinions are heard. And yeah, so if you guys want to say something, just do a sign.
Yeah, I saw in
Or not.
Sorry. I saw in YouTube that a person were asking if it's real that reverse racism doesn't exist, because I think you could read it like he, as a white person, has suffered discrimination. In Africa, I don't know, I didn't read the question so much, but yeah, reverse racism doesn't exist. A white person cannot suffer racism. It will suffer discrimination, but not in a systematic way, as we told before, because racism is systemic and it affects people of color because of what they are, because of their skin, their facial features, and the color of their skin. So, yeah, as a white person, you could have suffered discrimination, but not in a systemic way. That needs to be clear for all of us, because racism is a system that cannot be maintained without the idea of race. So, yeah, you are a white person, you have suffered discrimination, but you will not be suffering racism. That's my final point. Sorry.
Sarahi, just a follow-up, but then my example of a white person having problems with finding a job or a home to live in Japan, that this is not systematic for you. But what is then the system for you, just to make it clear?
Okay, so in my opinion, in my belief, the system points the white people, and all of the culture, the institutional organization, and everything that in the peak of the pyramid of the civilization, and everything that is not that below. So yeah, maybe in Japan, when a white man is trying to rent a house, it will be maybe suffering discrimination, but not in a systemic way. He will be, I don't know if you want something, but I think that he will be suffering some kind of discrimination, but not because of their skin of color. Maybe because he's a foreigner, but not in a systemic way. That's important to understand, that he will not be having barriers and he will not be having barriers in an institutional way, in a political way, because of their color of the skin. So that's all.
When Sarahi says systemic, it's that you might suffer racism in Japan concretely because it's Japan which have a problem with Western people, maybe, but you won't suffer from this discrimination, nor in Africa, nor in China, nor in France. But for example, a Colombian person will suffer from discrimination both in Japan, in Africa, in France, and also in Colombia if it's an indigenous person and not a white person, for example.
Does that mean that, for example, every black person, let's say in Germany, suffers from systemic racism? Is that true?
No, it's not like this. We cannot understand racism as something that personally we suffer or personally we generate, because someone might not suffer from discrimination in all her life, but as it's systemic, it means that all the people generally, it is something systemic that happens and happens and happens and happens. That's why it means it's racism. It's systemic because one exception doesn't make the norm, but the norm is more broad than that.
Well, okay, guys. Actually, I would say that this is a really interesting topic that we would need much more time to discuss about, because here we can see that we have really different perspectives, different opinions. And maybe we could do that in another webinar, or we can grab a coffee or something. But for now, I think that we should close up. And of course, I would like to thank you all for the interventions. I have personally learned a lot, and I hope that our viewers and followers and everyone who has been able to spend some time with us this afternoon has learned a lot. So yeah, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you being here, and I'm really looking forward to the next one.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me.
Thank you very much to all.
And thank you all, guys.
Very interesting debate.